Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When did you last rest without guilt? Not sleep. Not collapse. Not the kind of horizontal surrender your body forces on you after you've pushed past every reasonable limit. I mean genuine, deliberate, unapologetic rest. The kind where you stopped working not because you ran out of fuel, but because you decided your time off had value. If you're struggling to remember, that's not discipline. That's a malfunction. Here's what you believe about rest, even if you've never said it out loud. You believe it's a reward. You believe you have to earn it. You believe that the person who rests less, works more, sleeps less, and recovers faster is the person who wins. You've built an entire identity around your capacity to endure, and every time you push through exhaustion instead of addressing it, you feel a quiet pride, a confirmation that you're the kind of person who doesn't quit. I'm going to tell you what that actually is. It isn't discipline. It isn't strength. It is one of the most expensive cognitive errors a high-functioning person can make. And it is quietly destroying the very thing you're working so hard to protect, your brain. Let's talk about what burnout actually is, because most people have a completely wrong model of it. And that wrong model is the reason they never recover from it properly. Burnout is not tiredness. Tiredness is solved by sleep. Burnout is not stress. Stress is a response to a specific demand, and it resolves when the demand resolves. Burnout is something categorically different. It is the systematic depletion of your prefrontal cortex's executive resources over time, without adequate recovery, until the system begins to degrade. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain responsible for everything that makes you valuable. Complex reasoning, long-term planning, emotional regulation, impulse control, the ability to hold multiple variables in mind simultaneously and make high-quality decisions under uncertainty. It is, functionally, the seat of everything we call intelligence in practical application. And here's what the neuroscience tells us clearly. The prefrontal cortex is not infinitely resilient. It runs on metabolic resources. It generates waste products that accumulate with use. It requires specific conditions to restore itself. And when those conditions are consistently denied, the degradation is not gradual and invisible. It is measurable, progressive, and cumulative. You don't just get tired. You get worse at thinking, worse at deciding, worse at regulating your own responses. And because the part of your brain that would notice this deterioration is the same part that's deteriorating, you are almost perfectly positioned to miss it entirely. This is the first thing you need to understand. Burnout doesn't announce itself clearly. It disguises itself as the exact traits you most identify with. Difficulty concentrating feels like distraction. Emotional reactivity feels like passion. Cynicism feels like wisdom. Reduced motivation feels like needing a bigger goal. The burnout is using your own self-concept against you. By the time most high-achieving people recognize they're burned out, they've been operating in a degraded state for months, sometimes years. Now here's the frame that changes everything. You do not rest to reward yourself for working hard. You rest to maintain the hardware that makes the work possible. This is not a philosophical reframe. This is a description of biological reality. During sleep, and specifically during slow-wave and REM sleep cycles, your brain runs a physiological cleaning process, the glymphatic system, a waste clearance network that is almost entirely inactive during waking hours, flushes out the metabolic byproducts that accumulate during sustained cognitive effort, including beta amyloid, the protein associated with Alzheimer's disease. Your brain cleans itself, but only when you let it, during periods of genuine rest, not passive screen consumption, not background noise while you try to decompress, but actual cognitive disengagement your default mode network activates. This is the network associated with creativity, insight, perspective-taking, and the integration of disparate information into coherent understanding. The breakthroughs you've had in the shower, the solutions that came to you on a walk, the clarity that arrived the morning after a genuinely good night of sleep. Those weren't accidents. Those were your default mode network, doing exactly what it's designed to do when you stop interrupting it. The person who never disengages never gets those breakthroughs. They get incremental execution, and they get progressively worse at that over time. Now let's talk about the 3 specific patterns that cause intelligent, high-performing people to systematically under-rest, and what each one is actually costing them. The first is what we'll call the productivity identity trap. You have built your sense of self around your output. Your worth in your own internal accounting is a function of what you produce. And rest, by definition, produces nothing. So rest feels like a withdrawal from your own value. It feels like choosing to be worth less for the duration of the downtime. This is not a character flaw. It is a very logical conclusion drawn from years of reinforcement in environments that rewarded output and ignored everything else. The student who studied more got better grades. The employee who worked more got more recognition. The entrepreneur who hustled harder moved faster. The feedback loop was consistent and clear. Output equals value. Rest equals zero output. Therefore, rest equals zero value. The cognitive error here is confusing production with capacity. Output is what you've already built. Capacity is what you can build next. And the decisions you make about rest are not decisions about today's output. They are decisions about next quarter's capacity. Every hour of genuine recovery you sacrifice today is borrowed against a future cognitive debt that you will eventually be forced to repay at a significantly higher interest rate and at a time you almost certainly won't choose. The counter move is this. Stop measuring rest by what it produces in the moment and start measuring it by what it protects for the future. A 6-hour sleep that clears your prefrontal cortex for tomorrow's high-stakes decision is not a 6-hour pause in your productivity. It is a prerequisite for the quality of judgment that makes your productivity worth anything. Rest is not the absence of work. It is the maintenance of the instrument that does the work. The second pattern is stimulus addiction. The modern high achiever's brain is, in most cases, profoundly addicted to input. Notifications, news, social feeds, podcasts, emails, analysis, planning. The continuous processing of incoming information has become so normalized that genuine mental stillness feels not like rest, but like deprivation, like something is wrong, like you're falling behind. Here is what is actually happening in that state of continuous input. Your nervous system never fully downregulates. Your cortisol levels, the primary stress hormone, remain chronically elevated at a low baseline because the brain interprets continuous incoming demands, even the benign kind, as a persistent, mild threat requiring ongoing monitoring. And chronically elevated cortisol, even at subclinical levels, does several things to your cognitive function that are directly relevant to performance. It impairs memory consolidation. It reduces prefrontal activity and increases amygdala reactivity, meaning you become more emotionally reactive and less analytically precise. It suppresses the immune system, and it progressively erodes the neurological structures associated with the very capabilities you rely on most. You are not relaxing by scrolling. You are not recovering by consuming content. You are maintaining stimulation at a level that prevents genuine restoration from happening. The system never gets to clean house because you never actually vacated the house. The countermove is deliberate cognitive disengagement, not meditation necessarily, though that works for many people. Any activity that allows your attentional system to operate without effortful direction. A walk without headphones. A meal without a screen. 20 minutes of doing something with your hands that requires no planning and no output. The goal is not emptiness. The goal is to stop directing. To let the default mode network run without interruption long enough to do its job. The threshold is approximately 20 minutes. Research on attentional restoration suggests that meaningful recovery of directed attention requires roughly that duration of genuine disengagement, not 20 minutes of reduced stimulation. 20 minutes of genuine, non-directed cognition. Most people have not had 20 consecutive minutes of that in years. The third pattern is the most culturally embedded, and therefore the hardest to address. We'll call it the suffering premium. In most high-achievement cultures, there is an implicit prestige attached to difficulty, to the long hours, to the sacrifice, to the grind, not just as a means to an end, but as evidence of seriousness, as a signal that you care enough to suffer for it. And the corollary of that belief is a quiet contempt for the person who maintains boundaries around their energy, who leaves at a reasonable hour, who sleeps 8 hours, who takes vacations without checking email. That person is seen, at some level, as not wanting it enough. This is not just a workplace phenomenon. It is an internalized belief system, and it is killing performance at the highest levels. The research on elite performance across domains, professional athletics, surgery, music, chess, complex problem solving, is remarkably consistent on one finding. The highest performers do not simply work more than average performers. They work in more disciplined cycles of focused effort and genuine recovery. They protect their recovery with the same seriousness they bring to their performance, because they understand, either intuitively or explicitly, that the quality of their output is a direct function of the quality of their recovery. K. Anders Ericsson's research on expert performance, the research that popularized the 10,000 hours framework, contained a finding that almost nobody talks about. The elite violinists he studied practiced more than average performers, yes, but they also slept more, averaged more naps, protected their recovery more deliberately. The practice was more intense, precisely because the recovery was more complete. The counter-move is to restructure your relationship with recovery from optional to mandatory. Not optional, mandatory. With the same non-negotiability you apply to your most important commitments, because it is your most important commitment. Everything else you do depends on the quality of the system doing it. Here is what connects all three of these patterns: the productivity identity trap, the stimulus addiction, the suffering premium. They all share a single root error. They all treat your cognitive capacity as a fixed asset rather than a renewable resource. They assume that the brain you have today is the brain you will have tomorrow, regardless of what you do between now and then. And they build entire systems of behavior on top of that assumption. Systems that continuously draw down the resource while providing no mechanism for replenishment. Your brain is not a fixed asset. It is a dynamic biological system that degrades under sustained load without adequate recovery and restores itself remarkably when given the specific conditions it requires. The question is not whether you can afford to rest. The question is whether you can afford the version of yourself that emerges when you consistently don't. The most dangerous thing about burnout in high-achieving people is not the collapse. Most high achievers don't collapse dramatically. They degrade. Quietly. Incrementally. In ways that are invisible from the outside because their degraded performance is still above average. They never hit zero. They just stop hitting their own ceiling. And they often spend years attributing that gap to motivation or discipline or external circumstances, never recognizing that the actual variable is the state of the instrument they're asking to perform. You are the instrument. Protect it accordingly. Stop treating rest as something you earn after the work is done. The work is never done. If you're waiting for a complete inbox and a clear calendar before you allow yourself to recover, you will wait forever and arrive at the end completely empty. Schedule recovery the way you schedule deliverables. Protect sleep the way you protect revenue. Disengage the way you execute, not because you deserve a break, because the work deserves a brain that's actually capable of doing it well. The most frightening version of you is not the one who works the hardest. It is the one who works with complete precision, complete clarity, and complete presence. Because they have protected the cognitive infrastructure that makes all of that possible. That version of you does not grind. It operates. Next time, we're going to talk about something that might reframe everything in this series from a completely different angle. We're going to look at the psychology of how other people perceive your competence, and why the signals you think are communicating strength are often communicating exactly the opposite. The way you dress, the way you enter a room, The words you choose in the first 30 seconds of any interaction. All of it is being read by every person you meet. According to a psychological framework you've probably never been taught. That episode is going to change how you show up. Make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to come to that one late.